Welcome, welcome, welcome to day 4 of Get a Job in Publishing with the BKS agency, Pan Macmillan and Eric. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming back. I'll just waffle for a few seconds just while we get a few last minute entrants coming in. But we do have a very packed schedule, so I won't waffle for very long. Quick introduction to the evening. We've got 3 really interesting departments to talk you through this evening, 3 really interesting aspects of publishing. We're going to start off with production with Simon Rhodes from Pan Mac, who's production manager, sorry, head of production, I should say. Blimey, I just demoted him there. That was a bit rude. Production is a job which is, maybe not that easy to understand until you've been in the industry, but it's absolutely vital, and you absolutely cannot run a good publisher without a good production department. We're then going to move on after that to hear about the rights department, which we've touched on a little bit already. Again, it's a slightly difficult one to understand until you've had it explained to you, but they do an extraordinary job, and they're very influential in publishing, and they use a lot of broad range of skills. And then finally, in the kind of the glamour slot, we've got 2 people from the design department, or otherwise known as the art department, from Pan Mac, who I, like everybody else, think are just complete magicians, but also do an extremely challenging job. And then we're going to finish up with, we might have as much as 10 minutes, might be slightly less. We're going to finish up with just a few questions. So Raki is going to join me for that. And we're going to try and knock off a couple of the more sort of HR related questions, which you've been posting in the Slido. Should be already in the chat, a link to the Slido and the code, just to remind you of that. So you do keep those questions coming. That's what I just said. And without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing screen and invite Simon to tell us all about production. Simon.
Hello, everyone. I'm Simon Rhodes. I'm the head of production for adult books here at Pan Mac, and I just wanted to sort of start really by answering the question, what is production? Because it's apparent to me that quite a lot of people from outside publishing don't actually know what a production department does. So essentially, production is the department responsible for the physical manufacturing of the books. We ensure that everything's printed and delivered on time, under budget, and to a high quality. In terms, if you think about the timeline of a book, we are essentially the bit between the editorial and the art departments, and then the operation and the sales departments come after us. So it's the kind of last part of the creative phase and the first part of the commercial phase. It's a good way to think about it. Production specific tasks can vary somewhat between companies, but in general, we're responsible for getting hold of the final files for printing, for ensuring that the specification of the books is appropriate for the design and for the budget, and for making sure that everything happens as it should during the manufacturing process. So beyond that, the responsibilities could stretch back up into editorial or slightly into the art department without working. For example, academic presses often have hybrid production editor roles, which involve more close daily engagement with the text. Equally, you might be required to work a bit more the other way, do a bit of kind of logistics work, or looking at deliveries, looking at supply chain issues, stuff like that. Production can kind of go either way or both ways. But before I go on to discuss the particular responsibilities of the job, I'm going to go through a few different terms which you might not have heard of, so they make a bit more sense when they come up later on. So the first term is text design. So that is the process of working up an appropriate layout for the text of the book. Text designers use margins, typefaces, and other design elements to make sure the text looks as it should, both for the publisher and for the reader. And text designers can be either out of house or in-house. They can be part of the production team. Sometimes they're part of the design team, but they're a very important part of making sure that aesthetically your book is kind of harmonious and works in a way that everybody wants it to work. The insides are in harmony with the cover. After text design comes typesetting. This is basically the process of taking the design and using it to lay out each page to create the proofs for the book. These pages are then proofread and checked and corrected, and at the end of the process, we end up with a print file for the text of the book, which goes to printer. Now, typesetting is quite a specialist skill, and is generally managed by an external company. So as a production department, we're sending stuff out to external typesetters, and they're sending things back. It's not necessarily to say that you can't do it in-house. Some more complicated books or things that are on really tight deadlines, or particular cases can definitely be managed in-house if you have the skill. But in general, large volumes of typesetting is usually managed by an external supplier. The next term I want to talk about is repro. So that is not a huge part of the process, but it's something that you will have to do. And it's the process of converting a digital color image, which is what we generally get from the art departments, taking that image and converting it into a format from which it can be reliably printed. So, we will receive physical proofs of how it's going to look when there's ink on paper. So we'll know what it's going to look like. And obviously we need to adjust the files to make sure that if it's too heavy, take some of the ink out, or if it's too blue, things like that. So it's the way of translating an image that you see on screen into a physical object. And repro work is done on color. So all covers, all jackets, and usually every page of a color book with a color image will have some kind of repro involvement with it. Now, printers, everyone thinks they know what printers are, but the kind of printers that we use sort of split evenly into two types. So printers take our press ready files, the text PDF, which we get from the typesetter, and the cover and jacket PDF, which we get from a repro house or from the art team, and deliver as a book at the end of it. They manage the whole of that process. So jacket printing, text printing, binding, all in one place. And printers now tend to specialize quite heavily in one type of work. So our mono printing, kind of, if you think of just a straight text book, ours is done in the UK. Almost all our books, hardbacks and paperbacks, are done at a factory in Kent, which the way that sort of supply chain is set up, it means that the turnarounds are really quick and the costs are relatively cheap and manageable. I mean, if you look in your local Waterstones, I'd say 75 to 80% of all the books that are in there are printed in one of two factories, one in Kent and one in Suffolk, which is the other main mono book manufacturing place in the UK, and nearly all the major publishers use one or the other or both. Color books are a slightly different kettle of fish. The formats are often more bespoke, whereas the formats for mono printing tend to be very standardized. They're generally more expensive to produce, and they tend to be sent out of the UK. So we would produce ours in Europe primarily, for the adult team anyway. So we're doing work in Italy, we're doing work in Germany, Spain, and a little bit in Poland and a little bit in China as well, if the schedule allows. Just to give you an idea of the relative costs, a standard paperback, B format paperback, probably selling for £8.99 or something, would probably cost the publisher something between 35, 40p and 70, 75p to make, depending on the finishes of foils and laminations and stuff like that they've got in the book. So, it's relatively affordable in relation to the kind of £9 cover price, where a hardback cookery book will probably cost somewhere between £1 and £2 to manufacture, sometimes more. I mean, it can be a lot more. So after printers, or within the printers, is paper. So production are responsible for choosing the paper and managing the company's paper stocks. Paper needs to be responsibly sourced, and we as a company are annually audited on all our paper usage and sustainability. We buy our paper from Sweden, which is where a vast amount of the mono book paper comes from. It's a huge part of their national industry, sustainable forestry, and they produce massive volumes of very, very high level of sustainability pulp and wood products and paper as well. And the last element I wanted to mention is ebooks. So it's not just about physical books, production varying from place to place, but generally have some involvement with the generation of ebooks, and sometimes also have an involvement in the development of audiobooks as well. Again, it depends how the company's structured. So thinking about a possible career in production, the first job that someone would start off on in my department would be as a production assistant, and the main responsibility would be to look after backlist reprints. So this means costing and ordering reprints, making text and cover corrections, moving titles between printers if necessary, and ensuring that your books are safely delivered. This is a job is kind of a microcosm of a bigger production role, and you learn a lot of the core skills that are necessary later on in your career. It's also quite hands-on, so you'd expect to be getting quite deep into a lot of this stuff pretty soon after starting. You do that for a while, and as you develop your experience and your knowledge of different printing methods, paper types, book specifications, your responsibilities would expand, and then you start managing typesetting, dealing more with internal scheduling and external scheduling, liaising with other departments about when we get materials, and honing the particulars of the books. And in time, you'd be dealing with a much wider range of contacts. So depending on the individual and the role and the circumstances, I'd probably expect an assistant to progress to production controller in about 18 months to 2 years, which is the next step up. At that point, you probably look after your own list. You'd be given your own list to work on, and you'd start to develop more close relationships with the relevant art and editorial teams to make sure things are happening in a way that works for production from the beginning. And this also kind of requires a perspective shift away from backlist reprints, which is quite a reactive way of working, in the sense that you're responding to different levels of demand, to a proactive way of working. You're looking forward in the schedules and making sure that things are going to shape up in the way that we need in the future. And your eventual responsibilities would also include things like costing new projects at acquisition stage and at various points throughout the budget and their life cycle. And in the end, you'd be working with covers and text designers, editors and typesetters, liaising with printers and repro houses, learning about color, developing more complex book types, working on a larger scale, producing various types of ebooks, dealing with invoices, and then also learning crucially about the company's business objectives and how you can implement them within your own work. So what kind of person would be suited for that sort of job? Well, in my opinion, the sort of person who tends to do well in production is organized, practical, detail focused, happy to be working in systems a lot, and resilient. Resilience is important, and reliable. And I think those attributes would allow you to perform the kind of core functions to a good standard. And then at that point, you'd be able to build up your knowledge of the other skills beyond that. And then I think the next level up, to a really exceptional person in the role, or a good person in the role, will have softer skills, be better at developing relationships, allows you to influence your colleagues, encourage them to prioritize what you need rather than perhaps what they might do for other parts of the company, to creatively develop projects and to bring yourself into the process a little bit more rather than just sitting at the end and reacting to things. And essentially kind of work much more in harmony with the rest of the company to make sure that production is as integrated as it can be, which in the end is the way that you get the best books. So I've been asked to think about positives and negatives as well. So to my mind, the best thing about working in production is the connection with the physical book. As our lives become more and more digital and jobs move more and more online, it's a real privilege to be dealing with something that's physical and tangible. At its best, we're trying to make a beautiful object which will seduce readers into making a purchase. If you love books, as opposed to just loving reading, it's a great place to start. Also, what's really good is the standard of books in the high street, I think, is as high as it's ever been. There's a real renewed focus on special editions, beautiful end papers, sprayed edges, lots of high-end finishes on mono, and also in color and cookbooks and things like that, where I think in general the standard is really high. In production, you deal with all the different creative departments directly, and you can be closely involved in developing and implementing their concepts. You get sight of quite a large number of the company's other departments, and I think production does give you a very solid understanding of publishing right through to the point where we sell the books and beyond. Sustainability is also a key part of the job, from ensuring that we use sustainable materials to managing our carbon and plastic footprints, and using only ethically sound suppliers. One of the more frustrating aspects of being in production is a consequence of being in the position we are in the publishing process, where we're reliant on a lot of other people to do a lot of stuff before they get to us. Materials being late or projects being put together at the last minute can make jobs significantly more challenging, and is not the best way to manage things. And you're also part of a global supply chain and subject to the same complexities as anyone else who's manufacturing globally. So the last few years in that context have been as tricky as anything I can remember. There's been 3 failed Brexits, COVID nightmares screwed everything up. The Suez Canal blockage has really damaged international shipping and trade. There's massive price racketeering on the networks. It is not an isolated industry from a production perspective. I think a lot of publishing can be very inward. Production is not very inward. And then I thought I'd ask the youngest member of our team for her thoughts about what it's like to work in production, because I'm conscious that I might be a little bit distant from her. My perspective might be a bit distant from hers. So I'm just going to read out a little bit of what she said. She said, "I love seeing a finished copy of a book that I've worked on. It's really great to experience the process of turning a title from a Word doc into something physical. It's nice to be working in a creative environment where you can use your aesthetic eye to make something beautiful that will make someone happy. Production and publishing as a whole can be very female-based, and I love working with lots of strong, creative, and intelligent women. I think when I started, I wasn't 100% sure of what production actually meant. I didn't realize how much my maths GCSE would have been used and how technical it can be. A general workday is very email-based, which can sometimes be a bit overwhelming. Having to keep to strict deadlines can be frustrating, especially working with so many people with so many different opinions." And then she finishes off by saying, "In production, you're pretty much the center, an integral part of the company. You work with designers, editorial, sales, and marketing. You're the port of call for so many people, which can be demanding, but at times is also fun to be in control." So to summarize, I hope that's useful and has given you a little bit of a taster into what production is. Please don't hesitate to drop me a line if you've got any questions about what I've said, or put them in the chat and I'll happily answer them for you. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic. And yeah, please, people do put questions for Simon and Slido, and we may well not have time for him to answer them today, but we'll certainly get those questions to him in any case. But thank you for that terrific insight. And I was really pleased actually that you mentioned special editions and cookbooks there, because I think, any publishing job seeker, should actually particularly go to Waterstones and find out how there's a real kind of commercial battleground there with fancy special editions, which they kind of use as a point of difference. And also the incredibly elevated spec on, as you say, smart cookbooks, not necessarily the TV personality ones, but the really designery ones, and that's a way that they differentiate. And those things can't be done without a terrific production department. So Simon, thank you very much indeed. And now I will ask Sophie and Isabel if you would please unmute and share your cameras, and I will briefly share a screen. Because, yeah, here's you, and here's you on Twitter. So you two are going to tell us all about rights careers. So, and I will share slides from here. So by all means, fire away and tell me when to change slides.
Thank you. I'll kick off and then Izzy will take over on the more children's end. Brief introduction. I'm the Associate Publisher of the Adult Division, but with responsibility and a long career in rights. Next slide, please. Been wanting to say that for 14 months. So what are rights? What is rights? Rights is a department, but what are rights? Rights are the subsidiary or additional rights that an author grants to a publisher. So in every contract we have with an author, we are granted volume rights, which is the permission to publish a book in hardback, paperback, audio and ebook primarily. So those are the rights we exploit ourselves. Everything else in the contract is for the publisher to exploit on the author's behalf with specialist companies around the world. Oh, sorry, animal coming in. They're included in the contract we make with the author, and they're different on every single deal. So they're negotiated by the author or their agent with the publisher. So we're sort of behaving a bit like a literary agent, but internal, very much with an eye to looking after the author, as well as exploiting those rights for the publisher. We will estimate the income we'll make from those rights at the time of acquisition, and we will split that income with the author, always in their favour. I think James went into a little bit on Monday about an author's advance and how that was earned back by the royalties on book sales. So the author's share of their sub-rights income also goes against that advance and helps to earn back that the money that we advance to authors up front to give them a chance to write the books. The main types of rights are, I've included a few here. So American rights, selling to a publisher in America, which would be to publish in the English language, but in their own edition with their own cover, using their own sales and marketing team to publish in the States. Translation rights is a huge part of what the adult team do at Macmillan, and is selling to a publisher in any country in the world to publish in their local language. I don't know if there's a next slide there, James, which shows just an array of covers. So if you're aware of Adam Kay's book, This Is Going to Hurt, which we published a few years ago with enormous success in the UK, and we sold, I think, 28 languages and counting. And this is just an example of some of the covers that the foreign publishers put on their translated editions for their markets. I mean, that gives you a nod to perhaps some cultural differences in different markets, the different way of packaging the book. There's a similarity and a difference in all of those. And the job involves a lot of awareness of cultural differences, of different ways of selling, different ways of operating with all of our customers around the world. I think there's a second slide of some other foreign covers. Yes, this was a book published by our Bluebird imprint. You heard from Carol yesterday, I think, which again was sold in 10 languages, I think. So this is just an example of some of the lovely foreign covers from around the world. The next thing that occupies the adult team is selling serial rights, which is perhaps not something that everyone realises is part of the rights team's duties, but it's selling the extracts into newspapers from our books. So the next slide, James, has got some extracts you can see from 3 of our books here in various publications, and we work very closely with the marketing and publicity teams, the comms teams, in placing pre-publication extracts into newspapers, which is sort of the cornerstone of a publicity campaign on a major non-fiction book, and will kick off the PR, and is often less so these days, but is still worth a lot of money to the author. So we negotiate on behalf of the author for the publication to use their words, and we pass 90% to the author, so they get a large proportion of that money, and we take a commission for the often considerable headache of doing that. Just a few other types of rights. Large print rights is something that we sell on our more commercial fiction, in fact all fiction, which is to specialist publishers to publish books in large print mainly for distribution in libraries for those who find standard print size hard to read. We sell film and TV rights. Often those are sold by an author's literary agent, but sometimes they'll be sold by the publisher too. We publish Inspector Morse by Colin Dexter, which some of you may know, from the 90s, I think, and his TV series continues to repeat and bring money for Macmillan and for Colin's family. And the Peter James drama that's been on the last few months, Sunday night drama. Peter James is one of our biggest commercial fiction writers, and apart from the money that those deals bring, it can really transform the fortunes of the book itself. So obviously a film or TV adaptation of a book will increase the sales of the actual book as well, so it has a kind of double effect for us. Merchandising rights is something Izzy will touch on because it's often more in children's books, but would be selling to specialists who produce anything from plush toys to duvet covers to pencil cases, or anything that's yeah, not a book, that is a product. And then everybody has a permissions department, which is the department usually in rights that deal with requests to publish extracts of our books in other books. So when an author wants to use something from one of our books. So that's a kind of roundup of what the department do. It can be quite complex and quite varied, which probably makes it most fun. A little bit about how I got into rights and got to here. I have science A-levels, which is unusual in publishing, and I did a business qualification after my science A-levels, and came in very much from that more practical business route. I did a postgraduate in publishing and book production for a year, and then took an internship actually at Pan Macmillan a long time ago, which in those days was for free, and I'm very glad to say internships are now paid, as they very much should be. But I worked in the publicity department, and a job came up in the rights department, and I didn't know much about it, but it sounded like a fun place to be in the centre of the action, and took that first job, which was as an assistant, and then rose through the ranks at Pan Macmillan. Have worked at HarperCollins and Penguin, and freelance, and find myself back full circle where I began. And you might remember Jeremy Trevathan mentioned at the beginning of the week that he'd worked in rights in the middle of his career, after production and on his way to management. And a lot of people at quite senior roles in publishing have done some time in a rights department. It's a very good place to learn about the finances and the entire process. So it's a good ground for people to progress to quite senior roles. Next slide, please, James. So who are the rights department? I think they're the best sales department in the company. There are the UK sales company selling their books to the bookshops, International doing the same. We're selling content to anyone, really. We work with all other departments, really closely with editorial to cost books when we buy them and estimate how much we think we're going to make. So we get to have a view, we get to work widely across the lists, and we do have contact with authors and agents as well. So we do get that sort of primary relationship with the authors, which is fulfilling. We're important internally because we're a money-making department and we're crucial to the process often, but we have a very externally facing job, and much like Simon said for production, we are part of a bigger worldwide international entertainment industry, so we're competing in a much bigger pool than just publishing, which makes it very interesting. The next one, please, James. And then finally, from me, what do you need to be a rights success? You need to be really organised. There's a lot of information, there's a lot to read, there's a lot to do, a basic, high level of organisational skills. An interest in the world, a broad range of interests internationally, reading widely, writing succinctly, and being able to pitch an idea. And did I say organised? I think I've gone a bit over, I'm really sorry. And I leave it Izzy to explain the complex world of co-editions in rights. But thank you.
Alrighty, I'll try and speed through as quickly as possible. Perfect. So my name's Izzy and I am a rights executive in the children's team. I started as a rights assistant about 3 years ago and was then promoted to executive in December 2019. The children's rights team is entirely separate from the adult rights team, just because we need to work amongst children's design and production and editorial, etc. And we're also a bigger team than adults because there's such a wealth of rights to exploit in children's, as well as translation. There's film and TV and theatre and merchandising and audio. So if you see a Dear Zoo baby grow in Tesco, or a Room on the Broom stage show in the theatre, or a Gruffalo ride at Chessington World of Adventures, all of those deals were done by the children's rights team. However, a large part of our work is arranging co-editions, which are a type of translation deal that we do for books in full colour. So picture books and novelty, etc. Adult rights do some co-editions for books like cookbooks, which have like full colour photography throughout, but they're much more common in children's books. The theory behind co-editions is that the more copies we have on a print run, the cheaper the prices we get from the printer. So instead of us sending the files to our customers to print their editions of the books themselves, they send us their translation and we print the books for them and ship their copies to them. So we charge them a price that includes the price per copy, the price of printing the book per copy, the price to ship the books from our printers, which are usually in China for children's, to their warehouse, wherever they are in the world, and then a margin so that we make money on the deal. The black text layer in a picture book is really easy to change out throughout a print run. And so this means that we can print 5,000 German copies, 3,000 Taiwanese copies, 3,000 French copies, and 1,500 Luxembourgish copies of a book all on the same print run. And that will be cheaper than printing any of those quantities on their own. This means that co-editions are beneficial for our customers because even with the margin and the shipping cost, it's still often cheaper for them to join our big print run than to print their quantities on their own. And they're beneficial for us because we can often make a lot more money for both us and the author by creating a margin on each copy rather than getting them to pay an advance and royalty and print the books themselves. It also gives us a lot more control over the quality of our books that are being published all over the world and also how often our customers are reprinting. I don't know where my slide has gone, but it makes, so co-editions make children's a really sales focused role, which makes it really exciting because we have strong customer relationships with editors at publishing houses all over the world. And our aim is to get them to buy our books over anyone else's and get them to pay as much as possible for those books and to take as many copies as possible so that we can do some really exciting deals and make as much money as possible for both us and the author. And there's a real buzz in sending an email out to a whole editorial and design and comms team and production who have worked tirelessly on a book and letting them know that their labour of love is going to be appreciated in a whole new language by a whole new audience. And also knowing that you've been the one to make that happen by presenting and negotiating the book so brilliantly. A real highlight of my career so far was the Gruffalo 105 event. There it is. Which was a virtual event that we held a couple of months ago during the lockdown to celebrate the fact that we've sold the book The Gruffalo in 105 languages. And so we had the author and the illustrator, Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler there, and lots of people from Pan Macmillan and representatives from all of the international publishing houses that publish the Gruffalo all over the world. And it was so heartwarming to have so many people at the event saying how much this book means to them and what it means to their business. Some of the most obscure languages we've sold the Gruffalo in so far include Maori, Papiamento, Manx Gaelic and Esperanto. Having said all of that, the biggest perk of working in rights is, of course, the travel, which has been tricky this year. There are 3 key book fairs per year. There is London, which is usually in March. There is Bologna, which is usually in April. And there is Frankfurt, which is usually in October. Bologna is a children's fair, so the children's team tend to focus on Bologna Book Fair, whereas the adult team tend to focus on London Book Fair. So if you're into pasta and sun, then children's rights is definitely for you. International book fairs are a great way to have in-person meetings with customers, to show them some physical books, which is especially important in children's, where we have books with novelty elements and flaps, etc. and to show them our latest catalogue or rights guide. They are some of the most exciting and exhausting and fun weeks of our lives. As you can see here, the fairs take place in big exhibition centres, and every publisher will have a stand with tables and chairs where we take meetings. And we'll spend the whole day having back-to-back meetings, interspersed by running to the little kitchen at the back for Pringles and coffee. And then in the evening, there'll be events and dinners and parties hosted by different international publishers that you'll go to depending on what territories you're working on at the time. We also try and go on trips to key territories throughout the year, which involve traveling around that country, usually with a suitcase full of books, and visiting customers at their offices, which is a really important way to make them feel kind of valued, because you're making the effort to go to their office. Both book fairs and trips over the last year or so have been virtual, and I have to say that trips to Italy and Brazil in a virtual sense from the inside of my little flat in Shepherd's Bush have been some of the most depressing parts of the year, but it is amazing how well we've managed to cope using the technology to have virtual meetings and present books via video call. I just wanted to round off with a couple of points on what, from my perspective, makes a really good rights person. It isn't essential to speak a foreign language to work in rights. There's plenty of brilliant rights people that don't speak any foreign languages, but it can be beneficial. And if you're looking for a foot in the door in terms of making your application stand out, if you do speak any foreign languages, that can really make your application stand out in an application to a rights role. And it's the same with any sort of legal experience. I didn't personally have any legal experience before I started working in rights, but we do deal with contracts, etc. So that's another good way to show you've got relevant experience if you're looking to make an application stand out. However, as Sophie said, the most important thing is organisation. You're often balancing lots of different projects at once, especially when it comes to co-editions. And so you need to keep up with exactly where everything has got to and what's urgent and what needs prioritising. So if you see the joy in a well-made to-do list or spreadsheet, then rights is definitely for you. And finally, I just think a passion for books and publishing. The best presentations in meetings, in trips and at fairs come from people who are really passionate about the books they're presenting. And if customers are able to feel your love, then it might just make them fall in love with the books too. And that is my whirlwind tour of children's rights.
And as you say, who doesn't love a well put together to-do list? And thank you so much for that. Between that was a really superb introduction to the world of rights, which, you know, as discussed, I think a lot of people won't really have known much about, but you know, it is an incredibly rich and interesting and influential career path. So thank you so much. And now I would like to invite Ami and Alyssa to start your video and unmute, and indeed share your screens, because you're going to be responsible for your own slides. Quite right too. You need to give us any kind of like cat alert. I mean, you know, as Raki said on the chat, you know, house pets always welcome in these Zooms. Maybe you're not going to feature one, but anyway, whenever you're ready.
There we go.
Yeah, yeah, I think you want to hit slideshow down at the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, marvelous, you've got it. Why am I telling you what to do? Yeah, far away.
Thank you. So, Ami, were you going to start?
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce us. So we are both on design teams, but quite different ones. So Elisa is on the children's side, and I work across adult book covers, and Elisa deals much more with insides, moving mechanical parts, and covers, and I just deal with covers which are fiction and non-fiction. And so we're just going to briefly alternate on the same points, and we're going to talk about our roles in design and also what the role of a new designer might be.
Yeah. So my name's Elisa, and I design novelty books for babies and toddlers, specifically for the Campbell team. The formats I work on are all interactive and include novelties such as wheels, sliders, flaps, pull tabs, pop-ups, basically anything that jumps off of the page or helps to animate a story. My job is very creative, and the book's designs can be quite technical when you're making your design to try and move in multiple ways across a page. This sometimes requires lots and lots of patience. There is also lots of collaboration across the team. Designers work very closely with the editors, and sometimes two designers will share a design project together. It's also important to communicate clearly with other teams, such as production, to help make a book cost and also to ensure it will pass a safety testing for a certain age range. You get to come up with new book ideas and choose illustrators that you think would work well for a project. It really helps if you're aware of your schedules to keep your projects on track, because it can get very busy and there's always very fast turnarounds. You communicate often with your chosen illustrator, so it's important to be able to deliver constructive feedback to ensure both you, the designer, and the artist is happy with the final design. Pass it back over to Amy.
So as an adult book designer, I work across a massive range of titles, volume and just the mix of things as well. So it's very diverse, it's fiction and non-fiction. And it involves a lot of reading and a good awareness of type and design and illustration and photography as well. And the other thing that's really important to me is to work in an art team. I've been sort of freelance and in various publishing houses sort of over my career, but I really like having an art team. It's a massive support and everybody has different strengths. And we do share and collaborate a lot. And you need to learn to analyze a brief, which the editor will give you, and think about your target market. And that person might be really different to you. So you're not just designing for yourself, which is really important. Next slide.
Yeah.
And you get to commission a lot. So eventually, I think as a designer, you're capable of quite a good all-round sort of range of skills, but you will hit your limits at certain points. So you want every book to look different. So you get to commission a lot and do photo shoots. So you need to communicate well to your chosen artists and work out your budgets for this as well. And there is always a deadline. There are multiple deadlines. So awareness of that and planning is really crucial. And then finally, I would say it does really help if you can talk well about your work. It might not come naturally to a lot of designers, and there is room for introverts in this world as well. But I think if you push yourself, it really helps. So it's to explain why you've done something and listen to and process the feedback that you get from the other departments that need to look at your design and see if it's right.
And a quick snapshot of stages of book design for children. So in Campbell, design and editors will come up with a new book concept. That would be a combination of text, a book format, and an art approach. Then we will, as a designer, source an illustrator, and then we'll come up with a novelty and create thumbnail sketches. We'll then mock it up, make sure it all works, check with production to make sure we can afford to cost it. And we will then do all of the cover branding. The designer and editor will create an art brief, we'll brief the illustrator, we'll give them everything that they need, and then we will art direct them throughout the entire project and feedback until we will send it to print. Here are some examples to show a few different cover branding ideas before we decided on the final one, shown on the right. This is for our Superstar series, highlighting everyday jobs as jobs to aspire to for young children. I explored a few different ways the novelty could work, thinking, is it best to have a superhero cape magically light up, or have push-pull sliders to reveal elements that represent the job of a nurse? I also looked at colourways and typography, and actually in the end, I hand drew this font and got it turned into a live font, which is something that we can do here. And personally, I really enjoy creating hand-drawn fonts, so I try and do that as much as possible within my designs. We ended up with this design for the bold colours and having the nurse as the focal point, and added elements of stars changing colour when the tab was pulled. And we also felt like a rainbow and star design on the quarter binding helped reflect the NHS, which links into a very current topic that children can relate to at the moment. And here is a quick video to show you how the book works with the novelty. Just wanted to escape that to quickly show you a blank dummy to check the novelty movements work. At this stage, we could go back to the printers and ask them to make amends if we need. For example, this just falls out and it shouldn't, so we would have to go back and amend that one. And then here is the book. Oh, have I frozen? Don't know if I've frozen or not. No, I'm back. So it's nice to get a physical copy after looking at it on screen for so long. There's that one. And I'll quickly show you some other books that we've been designing recently, like Busy Diggers. And sometimes you get to work with famous illustrators like Axel Scheffler. So here is an example of Katie the Kitten. Quickly pass you back over to Amy. Oh, sorry, Amy. There you go.
Okay. So for me, our process kind of begins about 1 year before the book is due to be published. Not all of them follow that schedule. That's an ideal schedule. Some are more time sensitive and will be dropped into the publication schedule very, very quickly and have a really fast turnaround. That might be because they need to fit in with TV. They are a very current trend, or you're matching a publication date, say in America. So well, those are the reasons that things come in fast. You have to be able to deal with those as well. And the brief is taken to the cover meeting and discussed. And then the editor does that. And then a designer is allocated. And we decide that in a meeting after the cover meeting, just kind of very democratically within our team, when we just kind of play to our strengths and all say what we might like to do. And then you'll, about 2 months after that, you'll have that kind of rumination time, and then you'll show your idea or your concept, possibly an illustrator, and mock-ups, and that you'll show those to the editor. If they're like, they go into the cover meeting, and at that point other departments have a massive amount of input, so sales, for example, and if direction is liked, then you move on the idea, and you might commission and you do image research or further refinements, and that might take another 1 to 2 months. The cover goes back to the cover meeting. In theory, it is universally loved by everybody, but I think we all know at this stage it might actually go right back to the beginning. That can happen. If not, then it goes to the author, and probably their agent as well, and agents are increasingly quite powerful. So it's just a good thing to be aware of, that it's not just about you and it's not just an internal process. And again, it might flop at this stage, but you know, you just have to learn strategies to cope with that. And then over the next 1 to 2 months, the designer will finalize the cover. And then you'll make it high res, retouch it and upload it to all the digital platforms where it feeds out to Amazon. And then, as Simon was talking about earlier, about that simultaneously the text is being set, copy written, and so on. Okay, we're good to go now, thank you. So this is one I did for, this is a non-fiction title, and it's a collection of essays, and it's a bit of a hard one to pinpoint, but it was gifty, it's a bit sciencey, it's a bit folklore-y. There's some recipes in there, and it's 26 different fruits. It goes through the alphabet, and it sort of picks out their weird and wonderful individual properties, and they wanted it to look a little bit quirky as well, quite an original looking thing. So I produced loads of different designs, as you can see, the 6 on the left, and they go from sort of quite lavish and quite traditional, and one where you're showcasing one fruit, or you're showing lots of different ones, and a more contemporary photographic approach. And then we ended up with the one on the right, and here it is. I don't know if you can see this, but that's the actual cover, and all beautifully wrapped round to the back as well. It has no moving parts, unlike Elisa's lovely things. And then fiction design, here's another one. So this was like a love story involving 3 people over sort of 20 years of their life. And it begins with a pivotal scene where one of the characters gives another CPR and saves their life. So it was briefed, and they wanted to really play on the heart and the CPR aspect. And I did the first 4 amongst others. And they were rejected because they were felt just to not be narrative and human enough. So I took it away, had another think, spoke to the editor more, and then came up with the ones below. So what you've got there is much more sense of 3 people, or lots of people, or 3 people within more people, and that sense of kind of communication, and their sort of life, that's the sort of maze of their life. And we ended up with this one on the right. So the 3-part heart and the 3 characters. Which is really loved, and we did some lovely finishes on it as well. and that this is the final book here. So it's got a beautiful special colour on it, a fifth colour, so it's a really lively blue-green, and we use finishes just for extra legibility and sumptuousness, and a load of endorsements which you do have to fit all over your work. I'm going to throw that in as well. So nothing is kind of your pure artwork. It must sort of, it has commercial needs as well. Okay.
So moving on, as a children's book designer at entry level, you would be given design tasks that help support the design team. This could be anything from mocking up a physical copy of the book to making digital visuals, as well as designing Instagram posts and online marketing materials. You would help design books with other designers in the team, gradually learning how to design your own book. You would prepare presentation material for book fairs, help with mocking those books up too. These then get handed over to the rights team, which they will use to help sell our books into many different countries, and they get translated into lots of languages, as you mentioned earlier. You would help come up with new ideas and choose illustrators for different projects. You would learn how to set up files ready for print, and this is something you would be able to learn whilst on the job.
And so for an adult book designer just kind of beginning, you would be given a monthly allocation of books, and it will probably be quite a light allocation. And I think you'd probably be mentored by other members of the team as well, but you would manage these as much as you could through the design and the print process. And you would build relationships with editorial and the other departments, because it's really crucial to be able to speak to them, because the editor is actually the key for so much information in the book. So to build liaisons outside your department is crucial. And then also learning about different markets. It's kind of the people that you want to sell to, and they might be so different to you and have completely different likes. And then also where the books are sold. So we kind of find that we're designing things slightly differently. So if it's going to a supermarket, it might be simpler and brighter and more commercial. And then it might have entirely different design needs if it's going just into bookshops, independent bookshops. You build a good print knowledge, how to set up for print and the art department systems and workflow. And I would just say I did kind of 3-4 years at college, and I learned as much in my first 6 months of my first job than I did in all those years. And it was just different things. It was the world of work and all the practical side of it. And then develop skills to present your work clearly in cover meetings. And I've worked in other companies and they don't always allow the designer in to present their own work, but we do at Pan Macmillan. And I think it's a really good thing because you learn how to explain it, and you can listen to the feedback and you can troubleshoot, you know why you've done your design and why it works or what might not work. So that's actually really good, but it's nobody's favorite part of the week, I have to say. And then you would just clearly manage your deadlines, your commissions, and you expand your technical knowledge.
So we've actually covered how your role will develop in our previous slides. So we will whiz on through this one, but it will be on the slides for you to refer back to. Some joys of being a book designer for me personally, just being involved in creative discussions, choosing illustrators and coming up with new ideas can be lots of fun. Designing a novelty that works well to help tell a story. I like how artwork and a novelty in a book can help push the text further to make the book feel as magical as possible. And holding the physical book in your hands and seeing it in bookshops and seeing children playing and reading with your book can feel very rewarding. And collaborating as a team, sometimes two designers will pair up and design a book together.
And for me, it's seeing your book being read in the wild. That's really nice. And matching a work of fiction or non-fiction to exactly the right cover and guiding that commission. That's a really satisfying thing when you feel you've really got those two matching. And the same, like if it's a very concept-led book, getting exactly the right thing, that's really rewarding and more ideas-based. Seeing the book sell well and win awards is brilliant. Working outside your team with other creative people is fantastic as well, because they can just bring something completely new to the party. It can be quite stressful too. Author care, seeing an author love their cover is absolutely, it's a really wonderful thing, and then you feel like you've really got it right. Attracting a buyer to the cover who might not otherwise pick it up is also really good when you've sold to your expected market, but then a broader one as well. And I would just say it's a really varied job. And I just wanted to stress as well that you don't need a degree to do it. I know people that are self-taught, I know people that have moved sideways, and they're all brilliant designers.
And just a couple of challenges of being a book designer. Working to tight deadlines and juggling multiple projects can sometimes feel quite daunting. The book I showed you earlier was a drop-in and designed start to finish in 1 month, and that's not the norm, but it does happen and sometimes can feel quite overwhelming. Making novelty books can be challenging because they're very tricky to work out and very technical, and sometimes it just takes a long time to get it right, so it's always good to bounce ideas off of your team. And every piece of design is subjective, so some may love it and some may not, but it's just finding the right balance for the target audience and knowing what will sit well on a shelf in a bookshop amongst all of its competition.
And for me, I find that if your work is if it's your best work, it can feel quite personal and invested, and you have to just accept that it can often be knocked back and it can be quite modified on the final product. You might not be designing just for yourself, so you have to have the capability to do that. And some designs are totally rejected by author and agent, and again, you just have to kind of pick yourself up and think of another way of doing it, and there are many. And there are lots of stages to manage each month, and so workflow and managing that are really key. There are some very tight deadlines. Sometimes you can, this is different within each company that I've worked in, but a lot of pressure that the book should sell a certain amount, and it can feel as if it's down to your cover alone, but I just need to stress that it's not a science and that isn't the case. And there are so many stages of approval, which I think a lot of people don't realise as well, and a lot of input on your work. It's a very public job. Your work is very public. And then finally, when you see your book design in a charity shop, it might be a low point, but I'm going to look on the plus side, and it's still out there, so that's okay.
Thank you so much, both of you. That's an absolutely terrific insight into design, and brilliant to see some of your work in progress and some of the actual creative decision making which you're undertaking, how your work fits into the publishing strategy. It's absolutely terrific. Now we've got just like 3 or 4 minutes left, but I would love to just invite Raki and Sarah to join us, if I can find the correct slide. There we go. So yeah, Sarah and Raki, hopefully you can start your video and unmute, and I'm just going to fire a couple of questions at you.
Go for it. It's made me a bit sad. It's made me a bit sad that I can't draw more than a stick man, because I actually think now I would have loved to have been a designer, but my stick man's not even that great. So, take how it is.
Just while we're waiting for Sarah to unmute and start her video, maybe, Raki, we've had a question through the Slido, which is quite simple. Does Pan Macmillan run any work experience, internship or trainee schemes? Maybe you can just talk for 1 minute.
Yes. So this is a really interesting question for me, because I have a very strong view and opinion about work experience and internships, in that they have to be really beneficial for the individual. So somebody coming in and just learning about the admin is not work experience. So as a business, we've kind of tried to look at and revamp the way we want to do work experience and internships in the future. And I think the pandemic's helped pause the kind of traditional way, and our office move as well paused the traditional way that we used to do work experience. It was paid, but I didn't feel that it was always that valuable, and sometimes a bit too much volume and not enough quality. So I would say that we do them. They're going to be revamped and kind of relaunched probably a bit later this year, or a bit more information about them. But I think internships and work experience generally aren't, for want of a better phrase, as valuable as they used to be a few years ago. There's other ways to kind of get exposure and experience into roles. So long answer to your quick question, yes, but they'll be a bit more different going into the future.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Raki. And Sarah, can I invite you to field the next question, actually? And I don't think anybody's heard from you yet. So Sarah, forgive me if I get your exact job title wrong, but it's Communications Director and General Big Boss of Pan Macmillan. We had a question about career progression in publishing. There are lots of schemes and traineeships, but statistics show that it seems to end there. So in your view, how do people move on from their entry-level job or their schemes and traineeships and actually prosper in the industry?
Hiya. everyone. I hope you can see me and hear me now. James, is it all working? Because you were saying you couldn't hear me before. All good? Great. So in terms of progression, absolutely. I mean, I can talk very much from the PanMac perspective. I think there are sort of two key types of progression for individuals as they come in through their entry-level jobs and progress onwards. One is that we actually have quite a clear kind of capabilities framework so that people can progress within their role. So obviously you come in and you start a role and you perhaps don't have any direct experience, or you've got very little experience and you're starting at the beginning of that role. You're doing lots of training and development. Somebody's hopefully mentoring you or buddying up with you and helping you learn the job. So you're very much at the beginning. And then there's a kind of progression through that role. So for each role, there's probably a sort of beginning, a middle section and an end to kind of fully becoming a fully fledged, whatever it is. Let's say it's an editorial assistant or a junior designer. And we do have a sort of semi-scientific way of measuring that and looking at that in things like appraisals and one-to-ones and chats with your boss and your team. Another thing that we do is make sure that people are learning on the job as well as doing some sort of doing some training as well. And learning on the job is critical. I think, as Amy was just saying, what you learn sometimes in your first 6 months on the job is more than perhaps you've really learned in an official training course for years beforehand, because it's that real world of work, in which we're a really supportive company. We try to make sure that everyone is supported by their peers as well as their managers, and we buddy people up with other people who might have been around doing the same job for a longer time, for example. And then another way that people progress is obviously to be promoted into a new role or the next role on. That's the other way that people progress in the business. We're a fast growing business, and so opportunities are emerging all the time. We're sometimes creating new roles because we're growing and we need to like create a new division or create a new imprint. Or it might be just that, you know, someone's leaving and going on to work somewhere else, and that a gap opens up in that way. So we do encourage people to apply for jobs internally. And we like as much as we can to, you know, to progress people within the company rather than always looking to fill roles from the outside. So there's definitely lots of opportunities, I think, once you're in.
Yeah. Sarah, that's so interesting. And I think I'm right in saying that it's actually quite unusual for a publisher to have, as you say, that semi-scientific approach to progression within a role and the capabilities framework you have. I mean, I think the sort of the standard publishing thing is for it to just be a little bit Darwinian. And, you know,
yeah, I'm really glad we brought the capabilities framework in, because I have to say that it does, it really helps the person in the role, and it also really helps the manager, because it gives you a framework for thinking, actually, do we agree that this area is where you're really smashing it, but this area you could do a bit more work? You can have that conversation, and then the person can let us know as the managers, well, I would love to develop that, but I don't really feel I've had the exposure to that, or actually I feel I need some training, or could you give me a mentor to help me with that? And we can get specific about the things that are needed, rather than it being that rather general vague conversation that you can have when it's just a chat. So I think it's good, you know, it's very, very friendly here, and everything is just a bit of a chat, but to have those frameworks is really lovely as a tool.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly positive. I could personally chat about this for ages, but I know we're running out of time. What I will say, just to the audience, is that it's really, really worth, as you look at publishing jobs, digging into the stuff that Sarah's just been talking about there, and you know, trying to find out how they assess performance, whether there is structure in a career path, or whether it's just, well, you know, survival of the fittest or whatever. And also, you know, in an interview situation, it's never the wrong thing to do to ask about training, and to really be specific about it, like who does the training, you know, how much, you know, can I expect? You know,
so I have a slightly different view on that, James.
Okay.
To say,
yeah.
In that I think in an interview you're there to kind of show yourself and get the job, and I think training should be a given in all jobs and all companies, and I think we pride ourselves on that, and that development is a good thing for us. I think hopefully everyone in PanMac will agree that we've done quite a good job the last year with all the virtual training we've been able to do. Like, let us get into the real world and get living face-to-face training, because we've got lots of stuff lined up. I think the way publishing recruit and the way the world is at the moment has changed, and where we're trying to diversify and open up our doors wider than the traditional publishing recruitment routes that we used to use. The pressure of having that work experience to look good on your CV, in the right industry with the right boss, having those networked connections because your granddad's dog used to walk with your next door neighbour's uncle, or some random nepotism things that happen. It's not there anymore. And I think you as an individual, when you're applying for a role, you are applying for a role, not this version that you need to pretend to be, because you're eventually going to have to show up at work and be yourself. So do that in the interview and be real. And I've been at PanMac for 5.5 years, and I can hand on heart say that the genuineness of the people here is what makes the cogs go round, and the people working us all work together. And I've worked with Sarah Lloyd for all that time, and all these things have developed over the years, but now we're in a situation where the world kind of had to stop, and we've had to review all of the ways that people can get in and all the ways that people can work. We might now even be able to work with somebody that comes to the office 2 days a week, 2 days a month, but lives in Scotland, and that's a different reader group or a different, you know, angle in the world that we don't have access to here in our London-centric roles at the moment. So I would say training, yes, talk about it at some point, but it shouldn't be something that you are already requesting in an interview. The interview is about you and about the skills that you have to do the job description that you've been provided with. Sorry to have interjected.
No, it's absolutely legit, and no one would know better than you. I'm really conscious that we've gone over time, and I think we should probably close there, but thank you very much to all of our speakers. And I will just quickly see if I can share screen with a reminder of what we're doing tomorrow. So we're doing a CV hack. We're looking at how to optimize your CV, and we're also looking at the real brass tacks of, you know, the routes into publishing and stuff like networking, which will be really useful. And then we'll have a big Q&A at the end just to round up any issues. So now would be a perfect moment to get on the Slido and ask any questions that haven't been covered so far, because you know, we want to cover as much of that stuff as we possibly can. Brilliant. So thank you very much, everyone. We will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.
Bye.